Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Larry Rhodes.
And I'm Johannes McQuarrie, and we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone.
Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and curious people, people curious about living a life free of supernatural beliefs. This is a call-in show, however, we only have one phone line. So if you can't get through, we invite you to tweet us at FFTVKnox.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee monthly activities of the first and third Sunday mornings are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussion. The second Sunday is a book club. The fourth Sunday is a reflections gathering, which is a potluck afternoon gathering in a member's home.
And the Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meetup, often at a bar or restaurant. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria in the Old City for a happy hour after the show for food, drink, and conversation. And Friday, we'll meet for happy hour at the Beard and Beer Market. To find us at either of these places, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table.
I should note, saying that ASK is a fun meetup does not mean that RET is also not a fun meetup. Today is Tuesday, June 25th, and we'll be talking with Eugenie Scott, a physical anthropologist and former director of the National Center for Science Education. But first, we have news.
Time magazine had a cover story which wrongly attacked atheists for not helping out victims of the Oklahoma tornadoes. The cover story in this week's Time magazine, written by Joe Klein, is about how volunteering and doing service projects can help curb the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, in our veterans. Jake Wood, co-founder of the volunteer group Team Rubicon, Jake Wood had little tolerance for veterans who see themselves as victims. Post-traumatic stress, he says, he believes, is a condition that can be battled and defeated. If you're out doing disaster relief, Wood says, you're less likely to be thinking about yourself and more to be thinking about the people you're helping. You're also presenting yourself and other veterans as a model, as a potential community leader.
All right, sounds well and good, I guess. The article goes on to note that how doing these projects can help veterans in any number of ways, including providing them with health and psychological, quote, health and psychological benefits, greater longevity, reduced depression, and a greater sense of purpose. All of that makes sense. As part of his reporting, though, Klein joined one of the disaster relief groups and worked at a site damaged by Oklahoma tornadoes. And that's when he wrote this, quote, "There was an occupying army of relief workers, led by local first responders, exhausted but still humping it a week after the storm. Church groups from all over the country. Funny how you don't see organized groups of secular humanists giving out hot meals. And there in the middle of it all, with a purposeful military swagger, were the volunteers from Team Rubicon." Unquote.
Wow. The author said, "My jaw dropped while reading that because it's not absolutely not true." Klein took a cheap shot at atheists for not doing the relief work that churches, with all the personnel and financial advantages that they have at their disposal, were doing, even though they were often working right alongside them. He made the mistake that Minister David Brassfield did, though at least Brassfield eventually offered a semi-apology. Klein is simply lying out of his wazoo. A simple Google search, we turned up a number of ways that atheists help in the wake of the Oklahoma tornadoes.
But since Klein was too lazy to do it, we'll read the Google results for him because we're that kind of people. More than 4,300 people donated more than $120,000 to the family of Rebecca Vitzman. She promised to donate to charity whatever money she doesn't need. Foundation Beyond Belief raised over $45,000 for Operation USA and the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma. Atheists Giving Aid raised over $18,000 that will be given to local relief groups in Moore, Oklahoma, and directly to families that need help. Members of the Free Oklahoma Atheist Group helped families who needed wreckage removed from their property. According to Kai Tancredi at Red Dirt Report, those same atheists helped get food to volunteers and families affected by the tragedy. It's also worth noting that many major relief organizations like the Red Cross are secular.
Local atheist groups such as the Oklahoma Atheists, Atheist Community of Tulsa, the Lawton Area Secular Society, Norman Naturalist Group, and the Oklahoma State Secular Organization have organized volunteers, resources, and blood drives. Organizers of the Free OK Conference going on this week held a literacy drive yesterday for the benefit of the schools affected by the tornadoes. Is that enough proof that atheists, too, were and still are helping out in the aftermath of the tornadoes? Maybe Klein didn't know this was going on because, as Trent Tancredi points out, these humanist groups have no tax-exempt status and therefore can't exactly afford to have the T-shirts for everyone to wear so that you'll know that they're going out in force doing a volunteer effort. Or maybe it's just that we're not parading the fact that we're helping because we're too busy helping.
Let's make this very clear. Atheists and non-believers were in Oklahoma doing everything Christian groups were doing, including handing out hot meals. To suggest that we were not there and not doing anything useful for the victims is factually wrong. It's slander, or I guess libel since it's been written, against all of us who don't believe in a God. If Klein had mentioned any other group of people, funny how you don't see organized groups of Jews handing out hot meals, for example, you know there would be hell to pay. There should be an uproar now, too. Joe Klein and Time magazine owe their readers and atheists everywhere an apology.
Right. Time might be more likely to respond if enough of us call them out on it. Well, it would be nice if we could write them a letter, or if people in the audience could, let them know what you think, spread word online, maybe that you won't stand for this, or maybe even consider canceling your subscription if you haven't already.
Who reads Time?
Not only did Klein perpetuate an unfair stereotype against atheists, anyone at the magazine who read over the piece must have had no problem with it either. It's unacceptable, and we can't stand back and let it happen without saying something about it. And now getting back to the show.
Yes.
To the regular topic of the show. We'll be interviewing Dr. Eugene Scott. Dr. Scott, are you with us?
Yeah, maybe. Good afternoon.
Okay. Welcome to Freethought Forum. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing there?
I am the executive director of the National Center for a nonprofit organization that membership organization.
Dr. Scott, we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. How's that?
That's
Is this better?
much better. Thank you.
All right. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm the executive director of the National Center for Science Education. NCSC is a nonprofit here in Oakland, California. We're a membership organization, so y'all can join. And what we try to do is keep evolution and climate change in the public schools, science classes. These are considered controversial issues, so teachers get a lot of pushback on them, so we try to help teachers and other science supporters in communities to keep the good stuff in and keep the bad stuff out.
Right. Well, very good. You were a participant with the Dover trial, I believe, weren't you? Could you tell us a little bit about what went on there, too?
Oh, Dover is a wonderful story. Dover, Pennsylvania had been having problems with creationism for years, and things came to a head in late 2004 when a school board started passing various policies that would require teachers to present intelligent design as if it was really legitimate science, and the teachers just refused. We were called in to help, and we and the civil rights organization Americans United for Separation of Church and State and the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Organization, and a large law firm centered in Pennsylvania, Pepper Hamilton, we four got together and formed the legal team that represented the parents and other citizens who sued the school board when finally there was no possibility for any kind of compromise. The school board just refused to see reason. I mean, I just want to make sure that your viewers understand that the last thing you want to do is go to court. I mean, we always try to solve these problems behind the scene, but we'd worked for months and nothing was happening. So finally, the citizens, the community just said, we've got to sue it. So we helped. So my organization helped to advise the legal team on the science issues, the religious issues, the historical issues, what exactly is intelligent design, and we helped to prepare what turned out to be, fortunately for people on my side, a very successful case that in which a federal district court judge decided that the teaching of intelligent design was unconstitutional in public schools.
Right.
So that was a huge win for.
And he was a Bush-appointed conservative Christian judge, wasn't he?
Judge John Jones is a politically conservative Republican who is a person of faith. He attends a Lutheran church in the area. He's not religiously conservative, and he's pretty mainstream in terms of his religious views, at least generalizing from the church that he attends. But he is certainly a political conservative, and yes, indeed, he was a George W. Bush appointee, and a political protege, as it were, of Tom Ridge, who is the Republican governor of Pennsylvania the previous few years before the judge became appointed to the court. But he was considered a very middle of the road, a very reasonable judge, and it was very interesting. Now that you mentioned the judge, in the months leading up to the trial, the intelligent design think tank, the Discovery Institute, had people associated with the DI were crowing about how the judge is in the bag. This is going to be a great case for us. You got a political conservative. He's a churchgoer. Yeah, those Darwinists, as they. Darwinist is an epithet from their standpoint. Yeah. Those Darwinists are going to go down fast. And, what happened was we got a judge who was very open-minded, and he listened to the evidence on both sides, and he came down very strongly on the side, on our side, which was that intelligent design is not science.
It's religion.
It's just a religious position that's masquerading as science, and to teach it would be unconstitutional. And the judge said, yep.
And
further proof.
And going in, didn't you think that you were going directly up against the Discovery Institute? That they would be funding this and backing this attempt of the Board of Education to bring this to trial?
The interesting backstory of that is that the Discovery Institute did not want the board to pass its policy. And when in the process of legal discovery, where both legal sides are given the same, can request information and receive the same information, we requested all correspondence of the school district with the Discovery Institute and other entities, and we were able to see that the Discovery Institute was sending emails to board members saying, hey guys, let us advise you on this. This is not a good idea. We don't really think that school boards should be passing policies requiring the teaching of intelligent design. Slow down here, and they were ignored. But then when the lawsuit was filed, the Discovery Institute did throw in its lot, at least initially, with the organization that was defending the school district, which was the Thomas More Legal Institute from Michigan, a religiously conservative legal institute that defends what most of us would consider people on the other side of the church-state separation issue. And but the Thomas More people were in charge, and we assumed that they were working with the Discovery Institute people because the DI is right. They are the only game in town when it comes to the personnel who know something about this movement called intelligent design.
Right.
And initially, there apparently was cooperation. We tried to anticipate the expert witnesses that the Discovery Institute would be recommending, and we did pretty well. We got most of them. And then when they announced their list, then we went to work providing research on these people for the lawyers. But the Discovery Institute ended up withdrawing almost all of the witnesses that had been listed by the defense, by the school board side, the Thomas More side, and we don't know why. I'd love to know, but somehow they just don't take me into their confidence when they're making these decisions.
Can't imagine.
So we don't really know for sure why the people associated with the intelligent design movement from the Discovery Institute were withdrawn during the deposition period. It was really quite abrupt, and it did certainly hurt the defense because it was really too late when the DI people like Steve Meyer and the rest were withdrawn. It was really too late for the defense to get a new sheet of expert witnesses.
It kind of sends a message to the other boards of education who might be thinking about trying to attempt something like this, and expecting backing from the Discovery Institute.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, but remember, the Discovery Institute is not keen on these kinds of policies. The DI, I think, understands that school board policies requiring the teaching of intelligent design are going to run into major problems. As happened in Dover, if you have a phrase like intelligent design, any judge is going to say, okay, that implies an agent. Who is the designer? And pretty soon, it's obvious that the designer is not going to be extraterrestrial biochemist. It's going to be God. And once you are promoting the idea of God as a creator or designer or whatever euphemism you use, you've got a First Amendment problem. You've got an Establishment Clause problem. You are promoting religion in the public schools, and public schools are supposed to be religiously neutral.
Right.
You run into a real problem there in any court. So I think the DI realized actually in the early 2000s that they kind of got themselves saddled with the wrong name, and that they really weren't. I mean, in the late 1990s, the DI personnel were publishing articles in law journals talking about, oh, this is perfectly legal to teach intelligent design, and I'm afraid cooler heads started to prevail by the early 2000s.
We can only hope. We have a call coming in now. Would you like to take a call from their viewing audience?
Dr. Scott?
Hello, you're on the air. Welcome to Freethought Forum.
Hello, yes, this is Faithless Forest. Am I coming through?
Yes, you are. We just need you to speak up a little bit to come through so we can dial you in.
Are you there, Dr. Scott?
Sure enough.
Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Scott. I was, hearing about the testimony at the Dover trial, and in particular, I believe that Michael Behe testified there. Am I correct on that?
Yes, Michael Behe did testify.
And although it's bad science, I have read his book, Darwin's Black Box, and I've often wished that I could have FaceTime with him in front of a camera and ask him if he thinks he has proven that humans and the other species on this planet don't have a common ancestor. Because in fact, I've heard that he admits that we do, but that's not at all clear in his book.
I think you would find that of the various intelligent design proponents, you would find Michael Behe to be the most left-wing, if you will, not politically, but in terms of his science. He's the one who accepts the most evolution. Mike Behe has no problem with living things sharing common ancestors, and he's even talked about accepting that humans share common ancestry with apes. So he's very different from most of the intelligent design proponents, because most intelligent design, well, of course, intelligent design proponents are kind of two classes. There's a lot of the people on the ground at the grassroots who don't distinguish between traditional young earth special creationism and intelligent design. It just sort of lumps everything together. But then the proponents of ID that you find at the Discovery Institute, the other people who write articles and books on this topic, tend to be old earthers rather than young earthers. They tend to be more progressive creationists, people who believe in God having made a series of creations through time, as if you were to look at the geological column. You would see different groups of organisms at different periods of time in the rocks, and these represent separate creations by God rather than evolution from one group to another, which is how an evolutionist would interpret the geological column. But Mike is, Mike knows enough. He's one of the, he's well trained in biology. Actually knows more science than most of the people who hang out with the ID lot. And I think you would find that he is quite accepting of evolution, but he does believe that there is. I think what he believes, he hasn't written very much about this part of it, but I think what he believes is that God is directly involved in some pretty major tinkering with the production of life on Earth, not just human, but all life on Earth. So, because the basic idea of irreducible complexity, that's Behe's big deal in Darwin's Black Box and everything else he's written. The big idea of irreducible complexity is when you have an irreducibly complex structure, as he defines them, that is where you have the evidence of the direct handiwork of God. So a bacteria flagellum couldn't evolve. It had to be directly produced by the designer. So, God is sort of making this series of interventions, which is a little bit different from most theistic evolution on kind of the scale of different religious views of evolution. But that said, Behe respects the science a lot more than you'll find among many of the other intelligent design proponents.
So, Dr. Scott, do you know, has he ever in writing admitted that the cellular systems that he identified as irreducible have been demonstrated to be reducible, and that whatever it is he's using as a filter to identify these alleged irreducible systems is a failure?
No, he still believes that irreducible complexity is a valid concept. Obviously, the vast majority of the scientific community doesn't agree with him on that, and our friend Ken Miller, as well as others, have done a very good job of showing in actually quite understandable terms, I think, why this concept really is not something that's helpful to understand biology.
Okay, well, thank you, caller, for your call. We'll
sure.
try to
I'll
get back
free
to
up the line.
You had some questions, I believe.
Oh, no, I think there's an easy take-home lesson from the Dover trial. It's that regardless of personal belief, we can all get behind fact. But,
True. You just have to agree with the facts are. That's the problem.
True enough.
Exactly.
Facts come with evidence. Generally, that's an easy way to identify them.
Yeah, but one person's evidence is somebody else's inadequate evidence.
Or opinion,
I mean,
is what they call it.
we like to think the facts speak for themselves. They don't. Everything gets interpreted through an individual's filter. And it takes a lot of work in many cases to really outline step by step to help build a case for why one particular set of facts is the interpretation of one set of facts is more valid than another. It can be done, but it takes a great deal of work, because many people, maybe I shouldn't say many people, maybe it's everybody, but people tend to be kind of resistant to accept interpretations of facts that go against their ideology.
Well, springboarding off of that, with regard to defense of the facts, I know you're a physical anthropologist, but Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, he refuses to debate creationists on the grounds that it lends credence to their claim that a controversy exists. You've taken a different stand on this.
Oh, no, absolutely not, actually. Please don't misunderstand. The word debate is key in that. Richard and I are totally on the same page, and by now, thank God, most scientists are on the same page about how, no, you don't do formal debates with creationists or deniers of any kind, because you validate their position just by sharing the stage with them.
I like
and I've written extensively on why you don't debate creationists. That is only one reason. There's a whole long list of reasons, mostly having to do with the particular format that a formal debate requires. It's the kind of format where the evolution side starts out in a 10-foot deep hole, and before you can even get up to a level playing field, your opponent is miles ahead of you. And also because debate is a sport and has nothing to do with how we actually understand science. It's just an irrelevant kind of procedure to help the public understand the science.
I like the way
that's it.
I like the way
even though you don't want people to debate creationists, that doesn't mean that you should not answer their false claims.
Sure.
And we do that all the time, and I'm happy to do that, and I have done it, and so will Richard.
Yeah, I like the way that Dr. Dawkins puts it. He says it would look, if I debated him, it would look really good on his resume, not so much on mine.
Actually, he was quoting someone else, an unnamed scientist. That's a little snarky, even for those of us who don't admire the creationists very much.
Right.
But yes, it's quite a witty line, I think.
With regard to science education and I guess the nature of intelligent design proponents' arguments and beliefs, I found a lot of creationist and other anti-scientific arguments boil down ultimately to misunderstandings of or disputes over really fundamental concepts in science. Do you think that maybe a more rigorous coverage of fundamental scientific concepts, like basic chemistry and physics, would improve public understanding of, I guess, more specialized fields like biology? Or
possibly. I'm certainly never going to suggest that we need less science literacy. That's not going to happen. I'm not sure whether knowing more physics and chemistry is necessarily going to increase the percentage of people who accept evolution. After all, the idea of evolution, and on one level, is fairly simple. Living things share common ancestors. Okay, what's the evidence for this? The vast majority of evidence for this is unrelated to the basic physical and chemical underpinnings of the science of biology. And it's really observational and inferential kinds of conclusions that you draw from these observations. I think we make a mistake, those of us on the evolution side of things. We make a mistake if we think that we're going to solve the problem of so many people in the U.S. rejecting evolution just by piling more science on it. Because, trust me, people don't line up behind microphones at school board meetings because they want to debate the Cambrian explosion. That's not the motivator, It's not that they don't understand the science, it's that they don't like the science. And they don't like the science because they believe, for religious reasons, if the science is correct, then they're going to lose big. And they lose salvation, they have to give up the Bible, they have to give up believing in God, they lose their friends, their family. This is what they perceive. If evolution is true, everything that's important to me crumbles to dust. Now, obviously, all the science in the planet is not going to convince that person if they're going to lose so big by your being right. So you really need to approach this, the issue of why someone does not accept evolution from a multifactorial standpoint, so to speak. Yes, the science is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Science in itself is not going to turn somebody into someone who accepts the science.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's right at the bottom
Plenty
of the
of
hour.
sense.
We're just going to take a second to do program and sponsor identification. Shouldn't take us a minute. We'll be right back.
I'll be here.
Okay. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time on community access television station. You can also see it streaming online outside of the Knoxville area by going to ctvknox.org.
This is a call-in show, and we are live today, June 25th, 2013. And viewers can call now to the number on the screen or tweet us at at FFTV Knox. However, we do have a guest, a very important guest. But.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets 2 times a week, and we have evening meetups for food, drink, and conversation. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for camaraderie, and outreach to the atheists and agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons in the East Tennessee area. We would normally do a video at this point, but I think we should skip that.
The Rationalist of East Tennessee has Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussion of subjects topical and timeless. Once a month, we get together for a book club. You need not have read the book to attend, but it helps, of course.
Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee provide a social outlet where you'll find that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. And back to the program.
Yes.
We have Dr. Eugenie Scott on the phone. She's a physical anthropologist who works with the National Center for Science Education. You used to be the head of that organization, I believe, until recently. Is that correct?
I continue to be
You
there.
continue? Oh, very good.
I have not yet retired. My retirement has been announced, but I will be working here until the end of the year, or until they hire the new director, whichever comes first.
Excellent.
So I'm still in the traces, still in Oakland, still at NCSE.
Okay. So we can say that ID has gone away? Intelligent Design and Systems?
I think that would come as a real surprise to the folks at the Discovery Institute. They would tend to quote Mark Twain about the reports of their demise being greatly exaggerated. No, the DI has shifted its focus and has been quite active around the country in promoting what they and others have called academic freedom legislation. Every year we get a half dozen to a dozen of these laws submitted to legislatures around the country, which basically are anti-evolution legislation efforts, and it's sort of a backdoor creationism. They're worded in a very user-friendly fashion, so to speak. They're worded in a way that is very attractive to most citizens and legislators, because they promote the academic freedom of teachers to teach what they think is right, and the academic freedom of students to learn all the evidence. They stress critical thinking. I mean, who would be against critical thinking after all? And of course, it's interesting that the only subjects that you're supposed to think critically about tend to be evolution, and in many cases now they're bundling global warming along with evolution as subjects that students need to think critically about. And so basically this is a way of bringing creationism through the back door without mentioning it. The hope, of course, is to avoid situations like Dover and the other legal challenges toward the teaching of creationism, which have clearly been quite unfruitful for the other side. And so by not mentioning creationism at all, they're hoping to duck the First Amendment and get their views taught.
So it's dishonest to me.
No, it certainly is a legal strategy that is much better than the old one. I'm sure they would not consider it dishonest. They would just consider it a repackaging, and we consider it a repackaging as well. And we would just hope that the judge would recognize it as a repackaging, because these bills on the surface don't sound like they are creationism bills, which of course is the whole point.
Right.
I was going to ask, with regard to science education in general, and I guess moving into your involvement in this, I guess what could be called the skepticism movement, or skeptical movement. Could you loosely talk about your involvement in the movement and the implications of, I guess, a greater skepticism in science education? You were mentioning critical thinking, I guess disguised as a way to get students to question evolution.
Well, I found out about the skeptics movement back in the 1970s. Around the same time, actually, that I was learning about the creationism movement, someone gave me some literature from the group at that time called CSICOP, the Committee for Skeptical Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, CSICOP. And Psychop was publishing a very interesting publication called The Skeptical Inquirer, and I started subscribing and found it very interesting. These were mostly scientists, but obviously any person, science fans, who were concerned about what could be termed extraordinary claims, claims that might have been paranormal, or claims that didn't fit with what we know from normal science. Carl Sagan coined that. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and that was sort of the motto of the Psychop group. And that seemed like a sensible thing to me. And so a lot in the 70s and 80s, continuing to today, people who call themselves skeptics in the sense of skeptical of extraordinary claims have been investigating these claims and tentatively accepting ones that seem to be supported and showing why ones that are not supported should not be accepted. Right. And it's been a fascinating movement because it's ranged quite widely from things like UFOs and Bigfoot and astrology charts, which were kind of all the rage back in the back in the 70s and 80s, to health quackery, which is like many pseudosciences and scams, quite frankly, of actual harm to people. And people should have the tools to analyze these sorts of claims so that they don't fall for a phony health product, say, right, or procedure, or that they don't fall for someone who is trying to trick them out of their money, which often takes place, unfortunately. So the skeptics movement has been dear to my heart for many, many decades now. I think it was in the 90s that I was made a fellow of Psychop, and nowadays Psychop has renamed itself as CSI, the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, but it still publishes Skeptical Inquirer, and there's still a website, and they still are the go-to place, shall we say, for information on the how to analyze these extraordinary claims.
Okay, good. In a surprise move recently, Kansas adopted the NGSS standards. That's the Next Generation Science Standards. Isn't that kind of out of character for them? What's going on there?
Not a bit. No, actually, there's a lot of misconception about Kansas because back in the early 2000s, of course, it made headlines all over the country and for several years thereafter because they kept electing a series of school boards that really made bad choices and banned evolution or tried to get creationism in and banned it again, and it was really, we spent a lot of time in Kansas. But actually, the state of Kansas has pretty darn good education. If you look at the scores that come out of Kansas for things like the ACTs and the other kind of exit exams that high school kids take for getting into college, Kansas students do really well. And it's not like they have a crummy education system. They just periodically lose, get distracted and let school board members get elected who really don't have the best interests of the students at heart, so to
That's
speak.
good news.
Yeah. And actually, Kansas, I'm pretty sure, was one of the Next Generation Science Standards, the NGSS, 26 states that helped to write them. So Kansas has been on board and is quite enthusiastic about the NGSS. Now that said, there also are legislators in Kansas and Michigan and elsewhere who are dead set against these standards being accepted. Of course, the main reason is because of their inclusion of evolution and climate change. And of course, this myth that this is some sort of federal project that's trying to cram curriculum down our throats, which is another long story as to why that's wrong. But there are legislators around the country who are poised to introduce legislation that would defund any acceptance of the NGSS, which is not good.
Okay.
Back to your skepticism, with regard to, I guess, recent trends in pseudoscientific movements, case in point, anti-vaccination movements as I guess, a really visible example. How do we combat this sort of thing? I mean, the teaching of evolution is part of it, science education is part of it, but I mean, should we prioritize some science education over, I guess, other kinds of science education, or does there have to be a nationwide push by us as voters and by school boards to really and truly reinforce and back our science education to fight these sorts of things?
You know, these are all multifactorial problems. You're not going to solve it by doing one thing. Clearly, we need greater science literacy, no question about that whatsoever. But even if you have a reasonably literate population, that doesn't mean that citizens are going to necessarily make what scientists would think are the best informed decisions. If you look at, I live in California here, our office is in Oakland, California. Marin County is a very wealthy county not too far from, also in the San Francisco Bay Area. Well, Marin County has one of the highest per capita incomes in California, which means it's a quite wealthy area. Wealth and education are regularly correlated. These people are, professionals. They work in Silicon Valley. They work in, they're doctors, they're lawyers. They're very highly educated people. Marin County has one of the highest incidents of parents who refuse to vaccinate their kids any place in the country. And of course, we're also finding the consequent outbreaks of measles and chickenpox and other kinds of childhood diseases that shouldn't be taking place if people had, we're looking at this more sensibly.
Yeah. And
so if you were to ask these people, why are you not vaccinating your kids? You get a bunch of answers which do reflect the fact that they don't understand the evidence, but that doesn't mean they don't understand the science. These people very likely do understand the antigen-antibody reaction. They understand that when you inoculate a kid, you generate antibodies, and that protects the kid against infection. The science isn't the problem. It's that they believe that there are very bad consequences for their beloved children if you do this. Now, the problem here is not lack of knowledge of science. The problem is an ungrounded fear that their kids will be hurt. You have to attack this issue at its source, which is, appreciating the fact that parents are going to be really concerned about their kids' health and safety. Nobody wants to have a kid who's been injured, especially on the parents' watch. This is my fault. My kid, this terrible thing happened to my kid, whether it's some fear of paralysis or mental retardation, or God knows the confusing things people associate with inoculation.
No matter how unfounded it is.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a call. We have a call coming in. Would you mind taking it at this point? Thank you for calling Freethought Forum. May we have a name or a nickname?
Hi there. This is, I guess I'll go by my Facebook identity. I'm Within Reason.
Within Reason? Okay. Do you have a comment or question?
Yes, I'm just thrilled that you have this show, and to know that there are people here in the Bible Belt that that have a place to go. I'm thrilled that Dr. Eugenie Scott is a guest on your show, and your topic today is Bible in the schools. And we can't really name some people here for, I guess because we're in the closet, but there was a young man, a parent in the school system where I work. I'm a teacher. And his son came home one day and said that they were distributing Gideon Bibles in the classroom. It was a very orderly procession of the students will file up to the front of the desk, the teacher's desk, and the Gideon representative will hand you a Bible, and as a student, you're obliged, apparently, to take it. And so the parent filed a letter with the ACLU. The ACLU letter was submitted to the board for consideration, and apparently they are considering or negotiating with the ACLU. So I just wanted to call in. And also, anybody, who's there, they want to offer support, come out of the closet, or anything, come on.
Great. So Bibles in school, distributing Bibles in the classroom, that's not a good thing, is it?
Yeah, the thing is, public schools, by the First Amendment, by the Establishment and Free Exercise Clauses, have to be religiously neutral. If you are favoring religion over non-religion or favoring one religion over another, then you are violating the First Amendment. That's unconstitutional. That's a bad thing to be doing. That's a bad example to be showing to kids.
What should the parents be doing in this case?
Well, it sounds like exactly the right thing happened. The school was distributing books in class, which is not legal. The parents complained. The ACLU wrote a letter. The school board. Most school boards at this point know that that's illegal. But unless somebody blows the whistle on them, they're not going to do anything about it. If everybody agrees that it's fine, then no big deal. So it is important for parents to speak up, for anybody in the community to speak up when something like this goes on. It's perfectly legal if the Gideons want to distribute their books on the sidewalk, but they cannot distribute them on school property, and distributing them in class is totally unacceptable. There's a coercive element there that should not be present.
And they know that. They're well aware of that, I'm sure.
They should be. It's hard to imagine in this day and age a school board not being aware of this. But certainly the ACLU, and we've worked with the ACLU in Tennessee, and they're great. They're just incredibly overworked. They've got so much work to do, and they can hardly see straight, I suspect. But the ACLU is going to write a firm letter pointing out exactly why this is a bad thing to do. It's basically a cease and desist letter. And any attorney that is on retainer with the school district is going to take one look at that letter and say, hey guys, knock it off. Because you could get sued, and if you get sued, you're going to lose.
Right.
There's just too much case law against you. So when you say, what can parents do? What parents can do is speak up.
To the ACLU.
Well, speak up to themselves either. If there's no reason, local dynamics being very varied, some people might feel more comfortable working through a neutral, a third party like the ACLU, or just if you feel strongly enough, just write the letter yourself saying, distribution of Bibles in the schoolroom is religiously coercive. It violates the First Amendment. Please check with the district's lawyer and follow his or her advice on whether Bibles should be distributed on school property. He will tell you that they should not, and so stop doing this.
Okay, well, thank you for your call.
Thank you, caller.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Oops. To emphasize to our audience, again, the lack of Bibles in schools is not about atheism necessarily, nor about non-belief. It is about secularism, the idea that no religion is favored over any other, so we don't favor any religion.
Right. And if you allowed Bibles in school, you should also allow free thought literature, the Kama Sutra,
the Necronomicon.
Maybe not the Kama Sutra. What am I thinking? The Indian whole
Bhagavad Gita.
Not that one. Yes. Anyway.
Well, or should we distribute the free copies of the Quran?
Yes. Right. And if we did,
you're not supposed to translate that.
I wish the Wiccans had a single, holy document that they could distribute. Because I would love to see the Wiccans come up and say, hey, we'd like to distribute our literature to your students and just see what happens.
Well, if we give Christianity the right to distribute any kind of literature they want to in the school, then we got to give the other religions the same right, constitutionally.
Well, actually, I don't think that works either. The thing is,
it wouldn't work.
The school should be religiously neutral.
But the second,
you do not neutralize something by saying, okay, we'll let A go in and B go in, and that'll make it neutral. That won't make it neutral at all.
Right.
That just means that you're privileging A and B.
Right.
What about C, D, and E?
Right, exactly.
What about Native Americans? What about the Hindus? The thing is, you shouldn't be promoting religion in the public schools at all. You should be religiously neutral.
And we have another call coming in. Hold on. Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name or nickname?
Yes, hi, this is Greg.
Greg? Okay, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. I had a question for Eugenie Scott. You did a talk at Stanford as a part of a series called Darwin's Legacy. And in the talk, you talked about the different ways of knowing. I think you brought up like personal insight, authority, revelation, and science. And I was wondering if you could talk about how science really is quite a bit more distinct than the other ways of knowing. And you could maybe talk about how creationism wouldn't fall under that category of science, but it would be maybe under one of the other ways of knowing. And I'll go ahead and get off here and free up the line.
Okay.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. In that talk, which is online, anybody can find that. And it's, I forget exactly where it is, but if you Google it, it'll show up. In that talk, I distinguish science from other ways of knowing as being based upon testing explanations against the natural world, and bounding science as being concerned with explaining the natural world through natural causes. And it's the testing aspect of science that makes it unique and uniquely valuable and uniquely reliable for those explanations about those questions that we have about the natural world. Now, obviously, science is not going to answer every question people have. It's not going to explain why blue is a prettier color than yellow, or yellow is a prettier color than blue. I mean, there are aspects of aesthetics and other things that really aren't scientific issues. They're matters of taste and opinion and whatever. But when you're trying to explain the natural world, which is what I was talking about in that lecture, then science tends to do a whole lot better than any other way of knowing. Creationism, because it is based upon the specific kind of authoritarian way of knowing known as revelation, it is based upon the assumption that a reliable source, in this case the Bible, which believers believe is revealed by God, so that gives it a very important status. Special creation is the idea that special creation is believed to be true because it comes from an authoritative source. It is not testable. It is not only not testable, but unless you come from that particular culture or group that accepts the particular reliable source, special creation isn't going to be a very transferable, shall we say, explanation for how did we get the diversity of living things around us and so forth. Science is a much more universal way of explaining nature because of its testability. It's much more useful than revelation. And since creationism is a form of revelation, creationism tends to be not as useful, or we would even say not as valid, a way of explaining the natural world compared to science.
We come right down to intelligent design's usefulness itself. It just doesn't, it's like God did it. It stops inquiry rather than continues it or expands upon it.
Absolutely. Now, whenever you winnow your way down, shall we say, to a supernatural explanation, that stops science. That once you get to the God did it stage, then you have stepped outside of science, and science can no longer be used to test those explanations. I mean, I can't test whether God did it or not. How do I hold constant God? What are my variables? It's just outside of what science can do.
With regard to the breakdown of critical thinking, scientific inquiry, and I guess moving into civics, why do you think having a scientifically literate electorate is so important? Do you foresee any consequences of a scientifically illiterate population?
Well, I don't know how many people were listening to the president's address today on his upcoming climate and energy policy initiative. But there was an awful lot of science tied up behind the kinds of conclusions that he and his advisors reached. There are a lot of things that Americans need to make decisions about, and having to do with energy, having to do with food production, having to do with health and medicine, having to do with a lot of things that that we really care about. Our natural resources, for example, the oceans, etc. The best decisions that we make about that large number of issues, I believe, are going to be made if we base them upon good empirical data and logical inferences therefrom. The best decisions are going to be science-based. Obviously, science isn't the only question. There are going to be other issues that will have to, including issues of ethics and morality and so forth, that are going to need to be added to these decisions. But we can't have good decisions unless we base them on sound science.
Right. If science is ever proven wrong, it would have to be science doing the proving. We do have one last call we're going to try to take and squeeze in for a second. Welcome, Freethought Forum. May we have a name or a nickname?
You just call me.
Call him what?
Say again, caller. We're dialing you in here as far as volume goes.
Oh, okay. You can just call me Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith. You're on the air.
Yeah, Within Reason spoke to you a little bit earlier, the parent that she was talking about.
Oh, okay. Welcome to the show. What, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to, number one, say hi to Dr. Scott. I had spoken to her at CSICon last year about Kent Hovind had come to my town and had been invited to speak to the high school biology class.
Oh, no.
And I just wanted to let her know that that was the same. This is the same town that was discussed.
When is he supposed to be out of prison now?
I don't know.
But Kent Hovind was invited to your school to speak to your biology class. That's that's a nightmare.
Yeah, it was by the biology teacher here. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're down to less than 2 minutes. I'll let Dr. Scott answer this off the air.
Okay.
Thanks for calling.
Yeah. Well, and perhaps the most discouraging part of that story from Mr. Smith is that this was a biology teacher who invited him. I mean, the biology teacher you'd think would know better. Sometimes creationists like Kent Hovind, Dr. Dino, get invited by administrators or school board members, push them on the staff or something. But generally speaking, the science faculty should know better than to invite somebody in who has such a distorted view of science, because that does nothing but miseducate students. And goodness knows there's little enough time to educate students, much less wasting it on miseducating them.
Okay. Well, Dr. Scott, we really appreciate you being on the show with us today. We're less than a minute. We're going to have to start winding down yet, and we just wanted to give you our appreciation.
Well, thank you so much. And any of your viewers who are interested in what NCSE does could go to ncse.com. Our website is there, and there are links to our YouTube station, and you can find out more about us and even maybe consider joining.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Scott.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Time to start wrapping things up. Get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalist of East Tennessee.
Please send us feedback. Leave voicemail at 865-272-9060 or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
You can see this show most every Tuesday from 5 to 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time and live streaming on the air at ctvknox.org.
We'd like to thank our technical support.